In this episode of the Happiness Challenge, we're going to be covering depression. Now, depression is very unique in as far as the work we're doing here, increasing our happiness. They're not exactly the same thing, and I really encourage you that if you feel like you have depression, to go ahead, get that checked out, go to a therapist, go to a psychiatrist. Therapy and psychiatry do help. Especially when you think about it, depression is an incredibly common problem. It's one of the most common mental health challenges people face. Yeah, I was surprised just how prevalent depression and destructive depression is worldwide. It's the second leading cause of death in the world, comprising 30% of mortality. That's a huge number. And unfortunately, especially in the United States, not so much in the rest of the world, but the Western world for sure, and America especially, depression is getting much worse. It's the fourth leading cause of disease, burden, if you kind of factor in lost years of life, lost money, lost professional development, things like that. It's huge too. Now, depression has two general causes. One is situational, generally speaking, and the other is genetic. Now, it's a bit artificial the way I'm setting it up here, because for everybody it will be a mix of genetic factors and situational factors. But it's so common, it's fair to, and so different in how it manifests in people's lives, it's fair to make this sort of distinction, these two different types of depression. Now, situational depression, the way that looks is we all have problems in our life. There's always going to be times where we're going to be unhappy, sad, miserable, and hopeless. And what makes depression is it doesn't go away. It's not just a couple days, it's not just a week. If you're feeling the way you're feeling, over a 3-week period, you definitely should check it out. Most people with depression wait almost like 9 years before they seek treatment. That's shocking. So I really encourage you, again, if any of this sounds familiar to your life situation, please get it checked out. So back on track here, situational. What this sort of looks like is something, like I said, we all have pain, we all have sadness, anger, suffering in our lives. And what happens is there's that one domino that gets knocked down. You'll lose a job, loss of a loved one, corona. And what that ends up happening is it, just like a domino falling against another, it knocks down another domino after another after another. It's knocking out the legs of your life. So when it eventually develops into full-blown depression, it doesn't even necessarily matter what that first domino was. It's not a matter of treating that first problem, although that might be helpful, but it's looking at all the dominoes that fell apart as a result, and literally piece by piece trying to put back together a person's life. So that's the first type. The second type is genetic, where this is going to be manifest in a person's life as being chronic depression. It's just that cloud that's never left you. You've always had it. Life has always kind of been that way. And this sort of depression is often associated with a particular gene called the 5-HTT-LPR gene. And we all have this gene, but the difference between people who are more susceptible to depression and less susceptible is the size of the allele. Shorter alleles mean that we're more susceptible to depression, that it makes us less resilient to the different stresses that come up in our lives and the challenges we have, whereas people with long alleles have that much more depression, that much more protection against the catastrophes of life. So that's what depression looks like. The question we have is, well, wait a second. I said earlier, things are getting worse as far as depression goes. Now, if depression was only genetic, we wouldn't necessarily be seeing that. A lot of depression is going to be situational, and it's worth stopping here and figuring out what adds to depression? What are the things that people are doing in their lives that might be making things a little worse or a heck of a lot worse? So number one challenge, one thing that contributes to this increase in depression and just depression in general is we expect our lives to be better. And it's kind of a funny one because, well, the world is actually getting objectively better. There are less wars, believe it or not, despite Corona, less disease. There's less crime, less violence. And I know, especially in America, things are going through a rough patch right now. But when you look over the long term, the past 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, past 50 and 100 years, it's not just that things are getting a little better, but they're getting exponentially better. So there becomes this race, I guess you can kind of think of it as, is that, well, the world's getting better. Shouldn't I appreciate it? Is one way of kind of looking at it, that this sort of, maybe we're getting out of sync with how much we're appreciating the world around us and feeling a little guilty about that. And another is this expectation in the sense of we are being pushed forward to be more and more happy, that it's a little bit of a happiness arms race we have with the world around us. Now, the other part of this is subjectivity. Now, while it's true the world is getting better, there's more going on here. We intuitively, instinctively like to compare ourselves to other people. And that's great. That's actually how we become better people, by looking at the best example of what we idolize and trying to mimic that. And that works great. If you're a golfer, you're looking at the best golf player you can find and you want to imitate what he's doing because you want to be a better golfer yourself. Well, this backfires when it comes to happiness, because when we're looking at the people around us, social situations, how much people have, how much we think people are enjoying their lives, well, we're not being good scientists trying to figure out the average here. We look at the most happy person we know and then judge ourselves against that. It's kind of like being at a party and feeling like, hey, you're the shy one. Why can't you just get out there and make some friends and talk to people? But you're only really feeling that because you're only looking at the most popular person at the party, who is probably 10 times more extroverted than anyone there. So we're setting unreasonable standards for ourselves in our happiness that, like I said, ultimately backfires. The second part of this that contributes to increased depression, I think, is the culture we live in the West. That's a highly individualistic culture, and there's a lot of positives to that. Following our dreams, creating the life that we want, those are great. And I wouldn't want to give those up. But there's a dark side to that, because what that means is we're a lot more alone in our lives than the way people were living, say, 20 years ago and definitely 50 years ago. And that sense of loneliness is so encompassing in the world, especially in the modern world, that it is one major cause of depression and other mental health disorders. Kind of related to this one is the unraveling of social fabric. People are going to church and shuls and mosques, you name it, a lot less. There's a lot less community events. People are staying at home more, and a lot of this has to do with social media. People who are in their early 20s, late 20s, they're dating a lot less. They're going out on dates a lot less. They're more lonely in the sense that they have fewer friends and fewer people that they've actually dated. And they're getting, and people are progressively getting married at a much later age. There's a lot of disconnect. We're creatures that need other people. And while social media has played a wonderful role in connecting us to the world, it simultaneously has kept us out of joining that world in real life. Some practical outcomes to that is, again, this age group, people are a lot less able at sorting out normal life skills, going to the bank, talking to strangers, getting directions, making phone calls. Nowadays people literally schedule their phone calls via WhatsApp or some sort of messaging system, and then they call later, as opposed to, in my day, if you want to talk to someone, you just call them up. There's that loneliness, that distance, that lack of social cohesion. Another aspect of this is the fragilization that's been going on recently, and again with the same demographic of people going into university now. During the 90s, there in the United States there was a major crime wave. People that was just ending, but people still had the sense of the world was dangerous. Don't go outside, and a lot of parents were encouraging kids to not play outside, not talk to strangers, and fair enough, you want to keep your kids safe. But what ended up happening was, in my generation, the average age of a kid going out to play alone was 6, 7 years old, whereas today it's closer to 16. That's a huge difference. And that lack of real life experience, that feeling as though you can get knocked down and stand back up, is a major contributor to depression. Another is polarization. Here we can thank social media for that one too. We are more polarized than ever. We have different beliefs than literally the people living in our own home because of our news feeds. Social media, Facebook, all these different outlets use algorithms for advertising purposes, but also curating our news so that we literally are living in different worlds than the people we live with in the same house. And never before in human history has it been that way. And you think about, from a historical perspective, it's relatively recent that people are living in large cities, and even then, community sizes within large cities have been broken up where you knew about 150 people, that was your community, and you guys more or less were thinking the same thing, believing the same thing, having the same life experiences. That is no longer the case. And because we're living in separate worlds, because we're getting different information, we're unable to be able to bridge that gap with family members and friends. Again, that sense of loneliness, that isolation, only increasing. The last is material aspirations. This one has been growing for years, especially in the United States. People who want to aspire to have a good life, fair enough. There is a connection between happiness and money in the sense where if you're making enough money to keep, debtors, the debt collectors at bay, great. That does increase happiness. But past that, there is a slow decline and then a more rapid decline the more money you make, where the more you pursue material goods, luxuries, better jobs, more money, well, that actually predicts lower life satisfaction, predicts higher likelihood of mental disorders, and also predicts on a daily basis higher levels of anxiety and rage. Pursuing these sorts of things, having more money, and again, makes sense, we do associate money with security, but there's a line where it doesn't provide those things and distracts us from what makes life meaningful. We start developing unrealistic expectations, again, comparing ourselves with our coworkers, trying to outcompete them, comparing ourselves with our neighbors, also trying to outcompete them. We end up getting stuck in this rat race that helps nobody. An eye-opening study, every year there's an American freshman survey that all across the United States, Americans, freshmen who are entering college, are asked an assortment of questions. And today, if you were to ask how important is being financially well off, 71% of incoming freshmen will say it's very important. You compare that to 1967, only 42% of freshmen said that was very important. If you were to ask today, these same freshmen, how important is it for them to develop a life philosophy? About 52% of people say that's very important. But in 1967, 86% of people said that was very important. Literally, those numbers have been reversed. And that goes a long way in explaining why, the past several year incoming freshman classes, especially this year, are only getting more and more anxious, more and more depressed, where we literally have over half to 60% of freshmen saying that they are extremely anxious, extremely depressed, that they're miserable. It's no coincidence. So if any of this sounds familiar, please go ahead and get this checked out. If you look in the description box, I have a link where you can take a clinically used, validated research tool called the Beck Depression Assessment, where you can see if you actually might have depression. And I hope this video ultimately can explain what you might be able to stop doing if you want to increase your happiness and definitely combat depression. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. Please share it with your friends. Spread the happiness. If you want to leave me a comment, please do so in the comment box. I want to hear what your guys' experience of depression is, if this is something you guys are dealing with, and what's been helpful to you in trying to fight and get over it. And you can check me out on Patreon to support my work. I'll see you in the next video.